And for a lot of new fathers, it flicks like a switch the second you become a father. And it's the power to say no. It's not just the excuse, oh, I gotta be home, I gotta be with the kid, whatever. Like that's where people think it starts, but that is only like the first couple of weeks. And what you realize is that you wanna say no, and you don't even have to tell them why anymore, because you have a better use for your time than so many of these other things that people are trying to foist upon you and spend your time on. And then that then proliferates in your brain and in your system of how you operate, and turns into judgment. And you start to realize that like 98, 99% of the decisions that you used to spend time on trying to seek data and trying to come up with some rationalization for the decision didn't need that at all. That it was much more valuable just to make the decision and move on, because speed is important because you want to spend time with your kid.
All right, Cory Klippsten, welcome to the Present Fathers Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Dustin. Thanks for having me on.
Most definitely. All right, so first and foremost, I want to hit you with a really tough question. Why should a dad invest in Bitcoin instead of Ethereum or Ripple? Why is Bitcoin so special, whereas all the other cryptos are just not worth investing in?
So, people from the outside may say Bitcoiners believe, but I would say that once you get to a certain level of understanding, you actually know, and you know that Bitcoin is the real deal, and that the pretenders will continue to trend towards zero in Bitcoin terms over the long haul. That has happened to every single one of these 30 million altcoins, these non-Bitcoin cryptocurrencies over time. Only 2 or 3 out of that 30 million have ever had a second all-time high in Bitcoin terms after their first pump. So they're basically all pump and dump schemes of some sort, whether they're dressed up in like earnest dreams of technological progress or not. Even when they are earnest, like, probably there are, I know for a fact there are a lot of earnest builders on Ethereum. There are not on Ripple. Ripple is actually a complete scam. But, but uh, but those people end up just unfortunately participating in a long con, which is that something just takes longer to unwind. And Ethereum was kind of just broken from inception and only gets more broken as they add complexity to it. And it's kind of like a massive Rube Goldberg machine that ends in sorrow. So Bitcoin is the only thing that actually is decentralized, that doesn't need a centralized third party to control the roadmap and the supply schedule and all those things. So it's kind of the only thing that you can trust. So what I usually just tell dads, and I have this conversation with a lot of dads, and it's often new fathers that want to jump into this and think about it because they're finally thinking about legacy and the next generation and all of this. So it's a really great inflection point where you mint a lot of new Bitcoiners out of the new fathers. And I think you should think about your portfolio and basically stage your entry into Bitcoin and time the orange takeover your portfolio according to your understanding. Just make sure that you don't get out over your skis and you won't have problems, because the problem arises when you get excited and you go too heavy into it, and maybe you just like load up and you hear stories of people going 50% of their portfolio into Bitcoin right at the top of a bull market, and then that actually creates problems in your psyche and also with your spouse and for your family, even though you're not going to sell, because most of the people actually don't sell. But when they see that paper wealth, that it's not a loss, it's just down, but you still own the same number of Bitcoins. And in the long run, that's really what you want. You want your Bitcoin tally to go up always and never go down. Ideally, that's kind of the goal, is the long-term savings. So that's what I'd say is just, the more you know, the more you buy. So an investment in learning more about Bitcoin and gaining to the point where you believe you understand and you believe that and it's not just a bet and you're not just having faith, I think is probably the most important thing you can do. Like, you earn the right to hold more Bitcoin.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense. So talk to me about someone who it would not be appropriate for them to self-custody their own Bitcoin. Is it that they haven't learned enough? Is that maybe they're a gambler and they shouldn't necessarily have control over their own wealth? They should have someone else controlling it. Can you talk about a situation there where that might, be someone's scenario?
I don't know. I don't actually think about it in those terms. I don't think it's about gambling. It's actually way easier to start gambling your Bitcoin away if it's sitting in third-party custody on an exchange. That's when you're more likely to get suckered in to some meme coin or something like that. So it's probably that friction of it being fully self-sovereign, self-custodied, or maybe in multi-sig custody with a partner like a Swan or a Casa or something like that is less likely to be gambled on a whim. I think it's really just about kind of like your family's comfort with self-custody. So I use multiple models of custody for my family, and I think that's fairly common. So Swan has Swan Vault, which is 2 of 3 multi-sig, where you have 2 keys, Jades by Blockstream, and then Swan holds a backup key for you. So what's great about that is you can kind of keep one around the house, and you put one in a bank vault or in like the safe at your grandfather's house or something like that, and you can sign transactions with just your key and Swan's key. So I think that's a good model, and I think that's kind of the basic level that takes care of like most of the problems that people have if they don't want to go full self-custody or they're worried about the setup. I will say though, it's full self-custody often sounds to people like more trouble than it really is. Like if you have a trust attorney, they can hold a key, or you have like a brother or a cousin or something like that that you really trust that's in the family, they can hold a key for you somewhere. So it's really not, it's not as hard as people think. And, even the paper backup, it's pretty accepted and I think pretty tried and true that it's fairly easy just to, chop that seed phrase into 2. So you have, basically you want to have your 24 words duplicated and then chopped in half, and you want to distribute those 4 pieces of paper in 4 geographically distinct locations. And that's enough to basically like reconstruct your wallet with a different hardware wallet in case yours, bonks out.
That's exactly what the Winklevoss twins, right, did from Gemini. They put in the bank safety deposit boxes, right, 4 different copies of the seed phrases.
Yeah, and they learned that from somebody else that figured that out in the years preceding that, and and it works. That's a pretty fail-safe way to go. Like it's very unlikely that 2 of those are going to get bonked out, and if you are worried about that, then do 3.
I like
but
it.
just don't keep the 2 halves anywhere near each other.
No kidding. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so that all makes sense. Now, I would say, it's Swan. I would say, the OGs that have, tens of thousands of Bitcoins, like they bought on, Coinbase back in 2012 or 2014. Well, I guess probably more like 2013, 2014, something like that, or maybe like a Bitfinex or something like that. So like, that's not like the Swan whales that have put in as much or more money than those people did back then. Like our whales own a few hundred coins generally. Like there's some with a few thousand that have just gone like balls deep and they're rich, that's fine. But for the most part, you're not talking about the same quantities and kind of the same needs to protect that amount of wealth. So we get a lot of people where their threat model is more, especially because they're mostly US. 98% of our customers are in the US. We basically just serve, 2% of our customers are outside the US. It's like 20% of the volume. So they're kind of international whales, but it's not very many people. And I think in the US, we still pretty much trust rule of law, and boomers, especially some of the older folks, they just have like a little bit of a different threat model. And so a lot of them are just more comfortable with just kind of having an account. And you're not going to change their mind on it because they're 74 and the end is nigh or whatever they think. They end up living like another 20 years, like rather often, but it's just where they're at, and so we trickle the education over, and our sales team will talk to them about self-custody or multi-sig or whatever, but they're like, yeah, I got bigger problems if the government's coming for the Bitcoin, so I'm fine with it just being in cold storage at BitGo, in an insured account.
That makes sense. So
and so that's okay.
So then what is the advantage of having your own Bitcoin versus, so most of my Bitcoin, for example, is in ETFs. I just own iBit. Simple. It's on a stock exchange. What would you tell me that I would benefit from swapping to where I now own actual Bitcoin versus just the ETF exposure?
Yeah, look, I think there's a sovereignty multiple is what I called it. And I think I coined that last year, but it's basically like how much more valuable is Bitcoin in self-custody than Bitcoin being held for you by somebody else. And it changes depending on kind of your threat model and what you think the chances are of something bad happening in the financial system. If you think there's going to be like a 6102 attack, where the government, reprices the Bitcoin and forces you to sell it to them or something like that. And so in the West, I tend to find when I talk to our clients about this, I mean, obviously you're talking about people that have already self-selected into owning real Bitcoin. So their self-sovereignty multiple here is usually somewhere between like a 20% lift, so like 1.2 and like 2x. Internationally, there's a lot of countries where it's more like, them holding an asset in the system versus actually having something outside the system, in like Lebanon, Argentina, Turkey, something like that, where there's always the threat of capital controls or just straight up confiscation, like a bail-in, like what happened in Cyprus, to all the Russian money back in 2013. Like, that could be 10x, that could be infinite. They don't want any money in the system because they don't trust it at all. Or they're politically opposed to the people in power, so they just don't want any money in the system whatsoever. And so the sovereignty multiple for having Bitcoin is like infinite versus having it in the system.
This episode is brought to you by Pre-Sleep. Hey there, my name is George Hayworth. I'm a husband and father and an entrepreneur. I work out a lot. I like to stay physically fit and active. And one of my secrets for how I stay so healthy and get so much done isn't because I'm some awesome guy. It's because I use Pre-Sleep. Now, this product is one of my personal favorites. It's probably the best supplement in my cabinet, and that is because it's 100% pure and natural. All the ingredients are made right here in the US of A, and the product is based around magnesium, L-theanine, and glycine, and these three work together to help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. And then on top of that, it increases the quality of your sleep. So it is a triple threat when it comes to optimizing your sleep. And my favorite thing about it is that there's no melatonin, so it's not habit forming or anything like that. And there's no sugar whatsoever. So it is super simple to use. You just take one scoop, put it in a glass of water, stir it up down the hatch. I do it about an hour before bedtime, and I sleep great. I have no issues getting to sleep, staying asleep, and I track it on my watch. It tells me how good my sleep quality is, and it is exponentially better when I use my Pre-Sleep. So what are you waiting for? Go check it out. Sign up today, get yourself a tub of this, and you will never look back. Your best sleep is waiting in this bottle of magic right here. Get 10% off at checkout by using the code GEORGE10. That's GEORGE10, or tap the link in the description below.
That tracks. So what really excited me about Bitcoin, I don't know if this story is apocryphal or whether it really happened, but I heard a story about a man in Afghanistan who memorized the seed phrase and was able to relocate to Germany with most of his wealth intact. So everything he had was confiscated by the government. They took everything physical, all of his gold, all of his cash. They emptied out his bank accounts, but he still had enough money to get restarted because he was just able to memorize the seed phrase. So I don't know if you've heard that story or if you think that's true, but that really got me excited about the possibility that you could do that.
Yeah, look, I've heard that story too. I think there are a lot more stories of people that wish they had it. So the opening chapter of Inventing Bitcoin by Jan Pritzker is about his family leaving the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in '89 and how they were only allowed to leave with $100 worth of merchandise. And so you know where you're going when you leave. They were going to Italy, I think Rome. And so basically you like phone ahead and try to find some former Ukrainian or Russian speaker in Rome to see what people are buying on the street. And you buy a suitcase of that because that's all you can leave with. And, they told them, hey, everybody wants thermometers. So they bought thermometers before they left. And then they found out the info was bad and nobody wanted the thermometers. So then they had nothing. So luckily, eventually they made their way to Chicago and did fine because, that often happens. But yeah, shitty start. And they didn't get to bring anything with them.
And how much easier to have a little bit of wealth intact if they could have just kept it, in their head.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, there is a thriving P2P Bitcoin market in Lebanon, for instance. There's some Bitcoiners that we know and love on X that do a ton of P2P transactions there. And there is no exchange that they can access. It's basically just P2P, but it's people just hedging that. And yeah, hopefully they're memorizing, maybe they can go down to the old 12-word seed phrases, makes it a little easier to memorize.
So one of my favorite games to play with my son, he's 5, and we'll memorize little nonsense words, which is kind of getting him prepared to know and understand a seed phrase. And so we'll talk
Mm.
about how we could turn, we'll pick 12 words. We'll use ChatGPT and say, all right, here's 12 fun words that are relatively small, you understand. Let's make a sentence out of that. And so I don't know if you've exposed your daughters to anything about how Bitcoin works using that, or if you have any tips of, what you do to kind of get your kids used to the idea.
No, not doing that yet. I'm just getting them interested in Bitcoin as a form of savings. So while my wife is paying them in fiat for various things, allowance and chores and things like that, my big one doesn't want anything to do with it. Not sure why, but the little one is stacking sats like a beast, and she has a daddy ledger, and she's actually closing in on 100,000 sats now, which is pretty amazing. It's quite the little stack.
Not bad. I love it. So she has a low time preference already, right? That's
Oh
the
yeah,
idea there. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, she loves Bitcoin. She's like drawing Bitcoin art all the time, and I post her stuff on Twitter sometimes.
That's awesome. So do me a favor, explain what a low time preference is and how that's relevant to dads. What is the idea of a Bitcoiner who has low time preference? How do you relate that to being a great father?
Yeah, so basically, low time preference is just favoring your future consumption or your future self over your near term consumption or yourself today. So it's just kind of like investing in the future or delaying gratification, basically, because your capital or your effort or your intelligence or your resources or whatever it is will compound and bring you lots more in the future. And even if you discount that back to today by whatever mental accounting trick you want to use, you'll have way more in the future than you would have today, basically. And then, of course, the fatherly way to look at that is you're building a future for your kids. So it's a lot like kind of the immigrant story where somebody is like a doctor in Egypt and he comes over here and he's super smart, but he can't get a job as a doctor. So he opens a damn gas station. But because he's smart, he ends up with like an empire of gas stations and sends his kid to Harvard. Right. Which is fucking happens all the time. Like I'm constantly, you'll meet like some family. I was, my damn Uber driver in Palm Beach. I went out there for an economic summit kind of thing about a month ago, and my Uber driver was like a Turkish PhD, and he and his wife had moved to Palm Beach like 15 years before, and they basically had like a real estate empire. Like 2 buildings and like another 15 units or something like that. And, he was able to just kind of like do his part of it. She does all the books and he does all the BD, and he's basically able to do that while driving around, a nice Tesla Model X on Uber. And he just likes to drive and meet people. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was like selling condos to like his customers because he only does, luxury rides or comfort rides or whatever. So, like if that is the nice thing, like, and I guess this ties back to our first topic about, investing in knowledge. What they couldn't take away from Jan and his family is like their know-how and their intelligence and the fact that like they and their kids knew how to learn and they knew how to adjust and they knew how to be successful in a new setting. So, if you can walk from Afghanistan or Ukraine or whatever somewhere else and still have your brain and your knowledge and your approach to learning intact, walking out with a few $100,000 is not anywhere close to knowing how to make it again.
That's a great point. That knowledge is always more valuable than the actual wealth. That's true. So
Depends on how much they're stealing. It's not always more valuable, but there's a break-even point at least.
sure. I always like those tweets where it's like, would you rather have 1 penny a day or $1 million? And everyone's like, I'd much rather have a penny a day. And it's like, well, no, if you do the math, the million is still better. If it's not doubling or whatever. So it's always funny.
Yeah.
So you had kind of an unusual childhood growing up. Talk to me a little bit about that and then how that has affected the way that you parent and how you treat your kids and your wife.
Sure. Yeah. So let's see. My parents, I might have had like one of the longest travels from ends of kind of like the socio-political economic spectrum. I mean, my parents met on Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco in the 70s, and I was born a year later. And, by 24, I'm getting like a finance MBA at University of Chicago, which is, the Chicago School of Economics and, super intense and, hotbed of kind of, leaning right economic thought. Like you almost can't travel further. So that's definitely interesting. Um, so I grew up in Marin County, which is just the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco, till I was about 8, and then mostly Seattle. So I'm went there from 5th through 12th grade. So I'm like Sonics, Mariners, Seahawks. Actually, it's funny. Uh, all of the great grunge albums basically came out in fall of my freshman year of high school. So that was like Nevermind, 10, like 4 or 5 albums came out within 2 months that fall of 91, and everything just kind of exploded. And I thought that was normal. I thought it was normal that you were just going to see like underage shows for Pearl Jam and shit, and that every city had dope rock bands, you know? And meanwhile, of course, like I'm like a hip hop head and playing hoops and, going on traveling teams and hanging out at like inner city basketball games and listening to Snoop and Dre and NWA and everything. But, it was a bit of both. Like you grow up with the rock as well. And I thought it was totally normal that, of course, your older brother was in rock bands and playing huge shows and stuff like that. That's what you do, right? That's normal, right? So it was just kind of a weird place to grow up. Yeah, it's definitely. I guess everybody kind of looks back on some version of like the golden age or your golden years when you were young, and look back on it with nostalgia. But there was something really interesting about being in Seattle in those years, where everything else after that is like, it's not quite as good. Late '90s, like Third Eye Blind's okay. Eminem, you know, New York, eh. So, yeah, but look, man, I think one thing that I will say kind of came from the distance that I traveled from kind of that, early kind of hippie inflected existence in Cali and then going up to Seattle and kind of going to public school and going mainstream is I do think that I became, out of necessity and desire, like a very, very close student of other people and social dynamics and just kind of like how things work. So I just got really curious about what was actually going on and trying to kind of divine what was going to happen next and what people's motivations were and what they were like and all that. And I think that fueled my desire to be a journalist. So I was the only freshman on the paper and ended up editing the high school paper, and we were, top in state, and I won all kinds of journalism awards, and I went off to Mizzou at University of Missouri, which was the #1 ranked broadcast program. And I have a broadcast degree, and I was a really shitty local TV reporter in mid-Missouri for an NBC station for a year or two while I was in college. So I got that out of my system, and then I ended up going into tech. So I interned for Microsoft and worked for them and kind of started working for big companies after that. Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, McKinsey, Google. And, but I think throughout, I've always been attracted to trying to figure out what's true. So really the only subject that I ever really cared about in undergrad and in grad school was statistics. Interestingly, because it's kind of the study of like, how do you figure out what's actually true or what's probable? And like that framework and understanding the math and understanding the tricks that people can pull and how to see through it. And that is very similar to, the skills of trying to figure out who means well and who means ill and who's full of shit and who's amoral and who's immoral and who has high integrity and like all these kinds of things that comes down to like, taste, and whether you care about those things, because lots of scoundrels like to be around other scoundrels, so it doesn't bother them at all. But if like you are attempting at all times to kind of be high integrity and seek truth and understand what's real, you kind of develop a filter and try to find other people that are like that. Uh, anyway, so I think that's where that kind of came from, and I kind of built tool sets around communication and around bullshit detection, and then the hard skills were, basically like comprehension and communication and an understanding of statistics and probability that I actually have formal training in. And I think I was able to bring that to my career in management consulting and everything that I did at Google and everything that I've done in the startup world since going full time in 2013 after I left Google. I've been in startups for 12 years now.
Awesome. So something that's always stuck with me is trust but verify. So what does that phrase mean to you in terms of what we just talked about?
Well, I think the original formulation is don't trust, verify.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Okay. So then, yeah. So use that as a counterpoint for sure.
So yeah, that's the Bitcoiner version is don't trust, verify. Uh, I think and that's kind of like a layer one Bitcoin thing. Like the whole point is you don't have to trust anything. You can just verify for yourself by running a node and checking the transaction yourself. I think that the modification for the social layer, or layer zero in Bitcoin is something like trust but verify, which is like the way I would translate that is, let's say you're in a gathering of Bitcoiners, the percentage chance that the person you're talking to is like higher integrity, has lower time preference than the average population, and that you have some things in common with them is pretty high. There are some wolves in sheep's clothing, and there are some absolutely dastardly fucking scoundrels that claim to be Bitcoiners and that hang out around Bitcoiners, and you know who you are. But that's just going to happen in any community. There's always going to be infiltrators that come to monetize or fuck things up. But for the most part, you go to like a Swan private client event, or a well-run Bitcoin meetup in like a Minneapolis or or a Salt Lake City that kind of has like a good filter for who attends. Or a BitDevs. Like, I'm sorry, there's just like nobody going to a BitDevs basically that's not pretty into Bitcoin in almost any city. Like that's a lot to suffer through if you're not a coder. So you better be really into Bitcoin. Um, I think it's like a common ground. It's an affinity group, and you're likely to have some pretty similar views, or you will find that, okay, because we're both here about Bitcoin, I'm totally fine to afford you plenty of leeway to be, in my mind, an absolute nut job on these other aspects. And it's like you've got like a yoga instructor that has no problem talking about Bitcoin and economic history with someone that's like, manufactures motorcycles,
I like
and
that.
they would never cross paths otherwise, but they've got this common ground and this affinity for Bitcoin, that lets them then connect on a human level, at least about that. And then it just kind of, because you share that baseline, then when you're hanging out with Bitcoiners, like it makes people more interested in the other things that are not directly about Bitcoin, about the
Yeah.
other people that are around.
Totally agree. If you have one thing that you have common ground on, you can tolerate a lot more craziness. Whereas if you just start off with, we disagree on this, you like Ripple and I like Bitcoin, then we're immediately at a deadlock and maybe, have a trouble
Yeah.
getting along. So that's a key insight there. What are you teaching your daughters about that bullshit detection? Or have you found a system that you're thinking, okay, in a world where AI can create fake videos and you really can't trust your eyes anymore, what are you teaching them to not trust but verify?
I think it's easier for the generation that grows up with it because they create it themselves. So my kids are like using AI and using filters and, just like creating shit that's not real all the time. So they assume everything else is like possibly fake. They're watching YouTube videos of, Ninja Kids or whatever, and there's all kinds of special effects, and they know like, okay, that kid didn't actually jump off the building. Got it. I'm not going to go jump off the building. I think it's harder for the generation that's the crossover, that like grows up without it, and then it starts coming at you, and like, that's how they're scamming people, and like, they're getting, you know, these fake videos on YouTube or Facebook, trying to get you to like send one Bitcoin, I'll send you two back, and it's like, well, they said it. I saw Cameron and Tyler. They promised me they were going to send me the Bitcoin. Like, it's like, that wasn't them. Sorry, that really wasn't them.
Looks exactly like them, but it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can
definitely.
we talk
Yeah,
for a minute about how new fatherhood and being a Bitcoiner lends you a very similar superpower?
I would love to hear your take on that. Yeah, I love
All
it.
right.
Let's go.
So this was, I'm trying to remember when I came up with this kind of X temp, and now I've repeated it a bunch of times because I just think it's true. And it was basically, it was I can't remember who I was interviewing. I think I was interviewing Terrence Michael, maybe. Oh no, I'm sorry. I was interviewing Drew Bansal from Unchained, and we had rented out that Victorian mansion in Santa Monica for like a Swan private client event. And Nico Moran was in town from Simply Bitcoin. He was working at Swan at the time, and he had just found out that he was going to become a father. And I think he like took the mic and he was like, "Do you have any advice for a Bitcoiner who's about to become a new father?" And what I told him is, you are about to be granted a superpower. And for a lot of new fathers, it flicks like a switch the second you become a father. And it's the power to say no. And it's not just the excuse, oh, I gotta be home, I gotta be with the kid, whatever. Like that's where people think it starts, but that is only like the first couple of weeks. And what you realize is that you want to say no, and you don't even have to tell them why anymore. Because you have a better use for your time than so many of these other things that people are trying to foist upon you and spend your time on. And then that then proliferates in your brain and in your system of how you operate, and turns into judgment. And you start to realize that like 98, 99% of the decisions that you used to spend time on trying to seek data and trying to come up with some rationalization for the decision didn't need that at all, that it was much more valuable just to make the decision and move on, because speed is important because you want to spend time with your kid. And so you get these superpowers as a new father. Another one that I don't talk about a lot, but it's like the ability to be a better manager of people and just to understand how to use, resources. Because you get so used to just telling kids to do shit, and you don't have time to fucking explain all the time. And you thought you had to lead people like arm in arm, us together, and you just were like scared to take up authority and just like be the fucking leader. And so for those people that didn't have a lot of leadership experiences prior, like in my experience, because I was in management consulting for like 7 years, even my private equity work was management consulting inflected. So like from 24 when I started business school until 7 years after business school, I didn't have direct reports. I'd have client teams and I might have like consultants working under me on a project or something like that, but I wasn't responsible for their career progression. So it wasn't until I got into startups that I actually had like a bunch of direct reports, and I had organizations of like 25 people reporting to me and things like that, or like a big company like Swan. And I found that fatherhood was like such incredible training for that.
I love
So
that. That
anyway,
makes
like you can't be a good father without trusting your gut and making lots and lots of good decisions very quickly, and saving the deep analysis and the categories and weighting and spreadsheets and all that shit for like one or two really big decisions a year, and saving that energy for the ones that really matter. You only have like two big decisions a year, maybe, really. And then the leadership thing. I think that's also another one that I think comes or is enhanced dramatically by fatherhood.
I love that. And you and I met talking about Sahil Bloom's book, The 5 Types of Wealth. And so I like how you think about so many other parts of life in a financial way, right? We only have 2 billion seconds, right, that we get to use. We only have so much time and energy. And by saying yes to something that doesn't matter, you've implicitly said no to something that does matter. So if I say yes to getting wasted with my friends at the bar on a Saturday night, that means I'm saying no to spending quality time with my children on a Sunday, because I'm just not going to have the energy for it. So by saying no to my friends who I know are not going to set me up for success, I'm now saying yes to my son and daughter to have a great day the next day. And it's all financial management. It's all management of your time and your energy, how you feel, and all those things. So I think you're absolutely right. When you become a dad, your priorities become so much tighter. And I said no to nothing when I was a young man. If I had friends that wanted to go out and do something, I was going to go do it, to hell or high water. If I felt terrible the next day, that was worth it to me as a sacrifice to make sure I spent that time with my friends. And that has done a 180 now that I have children, because I love my friends and they matter to me, but they don't matter to me as much as my children or my wife. I mean, it's just an essential component. Yep. So I love that that superpower concept. And it's absolutely financial. And then I would argue that by only focusing on Bitcoin, you have more energy to understand it better and use it more effectively, right? So if I'm thinking about NFTs and Ethereum and Solana and Fartcoin, I don't have the time and energy to then have a deeper understanding of how Bitcoin works. So we only have so much time to invest in these ideas. And by wasting our time on other things, we lose the depth that we could have with a better product.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I like that a lot. The first time I ever transacted with Bitcoin was a friend's wedding. It was in 2017, and he's the chair of the Brevard Libertarian Party. So he said, "All right, there's this new thing. It's a little bit like gold, but you can send it, and I want you as a challenge to pay me in Bitcoin for your suit rental." So I said, "All right, this is a huge pain in the butt, but I'll do it." So I think I was using Coinbase, figured out how to get the money, sent it to his wallet, and I think I sent him like zero point 0.3 Bitcoin, right, for the suit. So he'll send me a text every year and be like, "Hey, I could buy a car, with the Bitcoin you sent me. Thanks, buddy, and I appreciate it." Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's really fun to to see those things progress as we get older. So as a dad, do you look at Bitcoin as a collector might as well when you're stacking sats? I know it has the financial component and the value as well, but what makes it fun for you aside from the fact that it is money and that it will set you up for success in the future?
I don't think about it like a collector. I prefer not to think about it, which is why. Okay, so I love having a Bitcoin buy happen every day and like getting the notification because it's like if you got outside and got some sun and like you hung with your kids and you got some physical activity and you bought Bitcoin, like it's a good day, you know? Like that's a really good day. You accomplished quite a bit. And I think that's why we pushed so hard to have daily buys, in the app back in 2020, is that's just something that I wanted. I wanted to do that every day. I don't want to have to log in and like do it myself. I just want to, we call it Swan and Chill, or Bitcoin and Chill. But the point is, it should just be happening all the time. And then when I do get like, one of my old startup equity stakes, has a liquidity event or something like that, and you get a little bit of a windfall, then it's, a conversation with wifey, and we decide how much of that I'm allowed to smash and how much has to go toward other things that don't matter. Uh, like kids' education and things like that. Uh, so, but even then, I don't time it. Like if we get dollars, I just put it into Bitcoin immediately. I don't like thinking about, when it's going in. I just want more Bitcoin. So I've bought at what look like horrible entry points historically, but I've also bought at every great entry point.
Yeah, the dollar cost averaging is so much simpler than trying to time it. There's a whole cottage industry, right? Of it's wave 5 of an Elliott wave. It's time to buy now. It's
So
all.
let me tell traders, you're right. You're right. If you're a really good trader and you know what you're doing, you absolutely can beat dollar cost averaging. Uh, Almost anyone listening to this podcast right now is not a good trader and has not been a pro for the last 20 years. Like what I have a little bit of my stack that I just give to, we have an asset management unit that, has separately managed accounts for people that want like higher risk, higher reward. And so I put like a little bit of my stack in that, just carved out a little bit. And I was like, okay, that I'm okay. You guys trade it, try to make me more Bitcoin. And they're the ones that know what the signals say and RSI and all that bullshit. Like they can pay attention to all that. And I'm happy to let them give it a shot. And it's true. Like it is a heavily manipulated market with a lot of autocorrelation, and it's still so new as an asset class. There's like trend following strategies work, and if you're really good at this shit and you know what you're doing, you can eke out a little bit of extra Bitcoin, but it's risky. And you personally, I'm talking to almost all of you, are gonna get fucking wrecked, and you're going to have to be in front of computer screens ignoring your kids, and it's going to be like dark and there's like green lights and you're worried about the Asia Open and you give a shit what Powell says again. And it's like it's stupid. Like that's not how you want to spend your day unless that's your profession. It's a horrible way to spend your life. And I think that's what the whole point is. Like what you want to be doing with your life is adding value, making money, spending less than what you make, and putting all or a good chunk of the excess into Bitcoin. Very few people is trading the thing that you're best at that can make you the most money. Otherwise, you would have already been a professional trader. If that's what you were good at, that's what you would be doing. But if you're good at running a roofing company, or you're good at being, a CMO or whatever, you're awesome at, opening and running profitable Subway franchisees, like do that. Like whatever it is you're really good at, that's where you should make your money, not trading. Trading is a job.
And I think it's one of those things that seems easier than it is, right? Everyone's a psychologist, everyone's a trader. You know, we think, oh, if these guys can do it, I can do it. And I think they don't understand tail risk, which is it's much easier to lose a lot of money than it is to make a lot of
Yeah.
money.
Also, nobody posts their losses on X and Reddit. Like they usually don't, you know? And when they don't win, they're not posting, right? So, you know, the whole crypto game you have to understand is negative sum. It's not even zero sum. It's definitely not positive sum. It's actually negative sum, and that's because the insiders, the pump and dump artists and the VCs, like they're the ones dumping on you. So Vegas might be like, you know, 4 to 6 points negative sum, depending on the game, right? That's the house's rake. Crypto is like minus 50. So the amount of money that comes out is like half of what goes in, maybe less, because it's all taken by the insiders. Like the crypto game is not a trading game. The crypto game is like a shell game. It's a pump and dump scam game.
Yeah, and coming from an environment where if you invest in, say, the S&P 500, you're investing in American dynamism, right? That's a positive sum game. We can all win together. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, you're right, these crypto scams are not like that. There are going to be winners and there are going to be losers, and the winners win because the losers lose. So I think it's hard to understand when you look at, I invested in Google this year and I did great, and I invested in, Meta and it was fine. So why doesn't crypto work like that? Well, they're not wealth producing assets that are creating things, right? They're
Right.
just coins. So
Yep.
that's yeah. And I think so. As a father, when you look at the world as positive sum, as we can all win together, what would you say to someone who looks at the world as more zero sum? You know, there's winners and there's losers, and we can't all win together. The world is very unfair. Is there a way to transition your mindset from zero sum to positive sum, or is this something you think is just kind of it's inborn in people?
It's cultural. So it kind of depends on who you're around, and it's based on kind of the cultural norms. Like the reason that all the biggest companies in the world basically are on the West Coast, it's either San Francisco or Seattle, is frankly because of the hippie movement in the 60s and the 70s.
Okay, that's a super interesting take. So let's dive more into that. I want to hear more about this.
Well, like, look, there were negative effects from that, and we are suffering from the negative backlash. But to think that the whole counterculture movement and like we can all win together and it's very communal and all that, I mean, Steve Jobs was a massive fucking hippie, right? And like Bill Gates' dad is one of the most like pay it forward philanthropic humans on the planet. He's like a true mensch that everybody in Seattle absolutely loves. He's like a super lawyer that was like good to everybody and funding everything. And that's how Bill Gates grew up, right? So these people, may have done terrible things, a lot of, obviously collateral damage for Steve Jobs with his family and things like that. And, kind of a psycho to work with. People liked it or didn't. Bill Gates, obviously is fairly self-important. Like a lot of people that make a lot of money, they were right on one thing and they think they're right on everything else. And they think they have the right to impose their views on everybody else, which, is a common blind spot for people with even a modicum of success. Let alone somebody who ends up being, I mean, you have to remember like Bill Gates would have like 3x lapped Elon's wealth had he not sold off all his Microsoft stock, to give it away, basically. Like he's still the most successful business person of the last century by far.
I'm certainly guilty of Dunning-Kruger occasionally as well. I'm good at one thing, so I must be good at other things. So
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, fuck, man, pickleball is way harder than I thought. As a really good tennis player, like,
so true.
that shit is annoying, dude. I like played at the gym a few months ago with some old ladies. I was like, this is fucked up, man. They don't even bend their elbows. Like, what is going on? They're hitting it so hard. Yeah. So yeah, you're not always good at everything just because you're good at one thing. But yeah, to bring it back, like I think that there's a whole culture that sprung up from Silicon Valley, and it's no accident that kind of was spawned by the culture around San Francisco in the 60s and 70s, which was about like let's all win together and let's build a better society, and that kind of like worked its way into the tech ecosystem, and all the venture capitalists came from that culture, and like the music and the business and everything was all about like let's win together, and we can all do better if we do it together. And I think that's something that's not replicable. Like you don't see that in older cultures that don't have a history of people winning by helping each other. So if you go to like an older culture like a Turkey where I spend my summers because my wife is from Istanbul, you know, it's very transactional and it's very much people keeping track of the ledger of like who's done what favors for whom and like, they didn't bring a fucking fruit basket. I'm not bringing them a fucking fruit basket. Like I don't even have to keep track of this shit. Like if I want to do something nice for somebody, I just do it. You know, I don't even have any idea whatsoever like what my friends have done for me historically over time. It's only whether I enjoy spending time with them. That's it. I just don't, I don't even have the concept of like keeping that ledger. And I think it's because I grew up on the West Coast. And, you know, when I went to school in the Midwest and twice, undergrad and grad school, and I spent time in New York City after each. So about 6.5, 7 years in New York, and then another 8 years in Chicago. And it's almost as you go west, it becomes less and less transactional and less of like keeping that ledger. So, you know, I was very surprised that, you know, most people that I would run into in New York, I would have to sort through them to find people that saw things the way I did, because most people thought you got rich by taking it from other people. And there's a tremendous number of people in Bitcoin too, almost exclusively in crypto, but there's a lot in Bitcoin that think that how you make money is by taking it from other people. So I think this is basically like age of culture and how your cultural norms are shaped by the world. So older civilizations where, you know, basically most of the history of the civilization predates the Industrial Revolution, and in particular the technological revolution of like the internet and when people really started winning together, are much more zero sum or negative sum and scarce resources. And I've got to just get it for mine and me and my family. And I'm perfectly willing to fuck other people over. You know, and so that's, you know, unfortunately that'll be like, you know, cultures like throughout Latin America, like Brazil and Argentina, like they've just been through troubling times and they've had to grab what they can. And it's like baked into the culture that, you know, what's prime is your family and taking care of them. And if you fuck over somebody else, especially like not even in your city, but you fuck over an American or something like that, well, that's justified because, you know, the cultural prime is taking care of you and your family.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, given your background and your thoughts on that, what would your dream for your daughters be? Would it be that they were entrepreneurs, that they went to college, that they are happy, that they have children? Have you thought about that at all? Like, what would make you the most happy to see them achieve?
Oh, dude, I just want them to be happy and like have fun and have a good life. And, you know, they'll handle it themselves. It's fairly obvious that, you know, if things go the way they are, they're very different kids. And the older one will probably end up in performing arts and will like, you know, be on Broadway or something. And the younger one is clearly going to run shit. Like she might take over Swan someday. I mean, she's such a CEO. It's hilarious. They're just both awesome for very different reasons, and they're very different people. And each of them is like half like me and half like my wife, but very different aspects of us, which is cool.
I love that. I remember it always stuck with me. I watched Dead Poet Society, and the son wanted to be a performing artist. The dad was a doctor. No son of mine will go into performing arts, and so he ends up killing himself, right? And it always stuck with me that it's so important that we don't try to make our children carbon copies of us, but rather we try to give them the nudges they need to succeed. And
Yeah.
that's
I will say, I think there's something about having only girls that, you know, I just recognize this for myself. So I'm not even trying to make a generalization here, but for myself and my own psyche, I think I'm much less inclined to try to like do a Pygmalion project on my daughters. Like they're already so different. They're different genders. I already barely understand, you know, my wife. Like I'm just like puzzled all the time, like trying to figure this shit out. So like the idea that I would try to like form them in my image and like force them to do the sports that I want to do and, you know, shit like that, like it's not even in the consideration set. I do think that you know, I have a healthy ego, and I think I would actually have like some different parental instincts with a son. But I don't have to see what that beast is because I don't have a son, and I don't think I'm gonna have one. So you know, so I am empathetic to fathers of sons because I'm pretty sure that I would be much more demanding and kind of like, encouraging of things that I wanted to see in my son. Because I think that's instinctual. I think they seem more like you if they're the same gender.
You're absolutely right. So my son, he's 5. He looks exactly like I did at that age. I was a tennis player in college, and he has no interest in racket sports of any kind. He doesn't want to play with balls. He loves to ski. He loves to swim. He's an active kid, but it eats me alive a little bit. And I'm sure when he's older, he'll like that. So it's very tough when your kids are not interested in the things that you're interested in to suck it up, say, that's just my ego talking. He's going to have other things he enjoys. And the beauty of it is when your kids don't like the things you like, you have to go figure out what they like if you want to hang out with them, right? So I've learned a lot from his hobbies based upon the fact that I'm not familiar with those. So it's a huge advantage in that sense.
Where are you based, by the way?
Space Coast of Florida.
Okay, cool. Yeah, dude, I still hit sometimes. Yeah, I was a very serious tennis player at one point.
Nice. Yeah. Next time you're in Florida, we'll bash. I'll get you out on some courts. We'll play in some clay. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I'll be in Orlando the first week of May. I'm going to come out for Strategy World.
Okay, I'll look it up. I'll try to make that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I think we're doing an event. I want to say Wednesday the 7th. I think we're doing like a Swan private client event that night.
That'd be sweet. I'm only an hour from there, so yeah, I'll try to make that.
Yeah,
but
yeah, you should hang out with Steven Lubka, who head of Swan Private Client Services. He's in Sarasota.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, he's always out and about doing something physical.
I like it. Those are my kind of men.
Yeah, yeah. Also, Alex Stanzik, another Swan Private MD, is in Florida. He's the one that was Special Forces in Navy and Army, and he usually takes his clients shooting.
Nice.
And he lives on a horse ranch, like his wife is a horse trainer. So he's got like a whole other thing going on in Florida.
That's a good guy to know. I like it. Awesome.
Yeah, we got good swans in Florida.
Very nice. Yeah, that's awesome. So real quick, back to a couple of dad questions.
Sure.
Can you share with me a really special moment that you'll never forget with one of your daughters that is an absolute core memory that lets you, when you think, okay, I'm having a tough day, my daughter's being a pain in the butt, you remember that special time you had with one of them that really brings you back?
Man, I've got like an image of my first daughter, like a resort pool in Palm Springs. And like she could barely swim at all. She was probably like maybe had turned 2, and she got a hold of like an inner tube, a floaty, and she put her butt in the middle and sprawled out with her legs and her arms out over the whole thing, but her head was supported, and she fell asleep and was just like perfectly balanced on this thing at about 2 years old, and she was just like floating around for like 20 or 30 minutes. Just asleep in the pool. And I was like, that's like such an adult thing to do, but you're 2, like what is going on? Anyway, it just sticks in my head as something where I was like, oh, that's going to be a person. And she already is doing the type of shit that we like to do. And she's not splashing over with like the fucking diarrhea kids in the kiddie pool. She's in the big pool and she's like chilling and like looks like she should be holding a margarita.
A pristine image. I love that. Yeah. Kind of gets you back to your happy place when they're screaming at you, for sure.
Yeah, I like that. I'm actually, it's in mind because we're heading out to Palm Springs on Sunday for spring break. Provided that everybody isn't dying of illness, we'll be there.
No kidding. Hope everyone feels better soon. Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. So you've been a dad for a while. Can you think of a piece of advice that you wish that someone had given you that you know now that you found very helpful?
just that first year will pass. Like, no, so I will say, I was so tired, in those first few years, and I will just tell all new dads out there, you get used to it and your body adjusts, and you end up being able to like sleep really deep, even though you got up in the middle of the night 2 or 3 times and you end up getting enough. So I think that first kid is really rough. But it just, you're completely different physiologically somehow by the second kid, and it's like not a big deal. So don't be scared after you have the first one and think about how much that sucked. It's way easier with the next one and the one after. And my second kid was way more finicky and like colicky and everything, and it still didn't matter. Like your body was trained to just like need less sleep or to sleep better in short spurts or whatever it was. And yeah, so just have lots of little baby Bitcoiners if you can. If you're lucky enough to be able to have lots of kids, like, Satoshi shall provide, just have all the kids.
That is true wealth. I love it. Yeah. And there's some fascinating new research that's come out in the past 10 years. Dad's testosterone levels plummet by about 80% for a year so that you're more calm around your children. Seriously.
Is that right?
All these yeah. Oxytocin is your cuddle hormone. That surges by 50%. So just knowing you're a dad, you're absolutely right. There are legitimate physiological changes that happen to your brain. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So one last dad question for you. What is your favorite thing about being a dad? What makes it so awesome that you absolutely love it?
Man, I think it's just that it's those heartstrings. It's just having that emotion, that is a gift in itself, just caring that much about, these little beings that came from you and your wife. Like, it's just, there's nothing like that bond of being a parent with a child. And it has so many spillover effects. Like I mean, obviously this has been written about in movies about the difference in how you think about your own parents once you become a parent. And so the bonds are different there too. And it lets you connect with them in a whole different way. So it's just, entering the group of people that we were, that we evolved to be. Like, we wouldn't be here unless, when we're humans, truly Homo sapiens with this brain, like 100,000 years. So what is that, like 4,000 or 5,000 generations? Like, they all had to want to be parents for you to exist. So it's like pretty obvious that you should probably trust your ancestors and do that too if you're able. No sweat if like it wasn't in the cards or whatever, but I just think it's beautiful. And I do think, by the way, that if we were unable to have kids for some reason, we absolutely would have adopted. Like, I definitely would have sought out this experience. Like, I wanted to be a dad. I wanted to be a dad long before I was emotionally or socially or professionally ready to be a father. I always knew I wanted to be a dad.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it made me appreciate my mom so much more. When I realize what I'm going through now, oh my gosh, it's so much work, but it's a beautiful burden, I call it, right? Because it's a huge burden, but it is beautiful and meaningful and absolutely amazing. So
yeah, I'll close with a quick story from my pops. And I actually am doing a private client webinar that started 2 minutes ago. Kristen's going to kill me. My dad used to take me out every Saturday for Saturday Sports Spectacular. So we'd like basically pack every piece of sports equipment in the car and do them all. We'd play baseball, soccer, tennis, football, like everything, like every Saturday. And I always thought like he wanted to do that until I became a father. And like now I'm just doing all the things my kids want to do. And I was like, God damn, dude, my dad probably didn't want to do any of that shit. Like he was a runner. He was a track guy. Like he had to learn basketball to play basketball with me. He had to learn baseball to play baseball with me. Like, he didn't actually do any of these things, and he learned them all enough to play with me as an adult. And to take that time, like, oh man, it's awesome.
It really
anyway,
is.
I really have to go. Dustin, This was awesome. Thank you. I'll let it finish uploading, but I can't wait to see this. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Thanks again, Cory.
Okay.
Great chatting. All right.
Bye.
See ya. Yep.
Thanks for watching this episode of the podcast. If you're on YouTube, drop a subscription to us, and if you are listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave us a review. It helps greatly. If you are also ready to level up as a man, check out Elite Sentinel Coaching, our program designed specifically for men, where we forge men into leaders. We turn cowards into kings, weaklings into warriors. Become the hero in your story. Join us today.